So typically on the channel, we talk to current broadcasters in the Ontario Hockey League, and with the Sudbury Wolves coming to town this weekend, thought we'd do something a little different. We'll talk to a former voice of the Sudbury Wolves, Joe Bowen. Joe, thanks for coming out here today.
My pleasure, Mike. I didn't get to do a game in Barrie. You guys weren't around at that point.
Yeah, I guess that'd be in the 70s there, but the
Yep.
Sudbury Wolves had some good teams when you were there.
Yeah, they did. I started in '74, and we had some really good teams through that course. Stu Duncan, Jerry Topazzini, and company had some teams that probably should have gone further, except for the Toronto Marlies and the Hamilton Finn Cups getting in the way. But yeah, they were pretty exciting times.
Now you're from the Nickle City, so when you got the call to be able to do those games for the Sudbury Wolves, that must have been pretty special for you coming out of university.
Well, I did, and really, it's more of a situation of who you knew rather than what you knew. My dad passed away when I was just 14, but his childhood friend and great friend through his years was a gentleman by the name of Bill Plant. And Mr. Plant owned the television and radio station CKSO in Sudbury and was part owner of the Sudbury Wolves. So when I went to University of Windsor and got involved in broadcasting and whatnot, I was able to secure a summer job through Mr. Plant to get me through school. And then when I graduated, he kept a position open in the promotion department for me where I started. And when Bill Catalano, the voice of the Sudbury Wolves, decided to go to CBC, I walked down the hall and I said to Mr. Plant, I'd like to audition for that. And he said, no, I've heard you. You're good enough. Then away you go. So it wasn't so much what I knew, it was who I knew.
And at that time, was your goal to get into sports broadcasting or just broadcasting in general?
No, and oh no, when I was at Windsor, I did a lot of basketball because our varsity team went to the national championship in 2 of the 3 years that I was at school. Remember, there was grade 13 then. You only had to go to 3 years of college. But so I very much wanted to get into broadcasting. And that's sort of what the dream was. The initial dream was to actually play in the league, but that went up in flames pretty quickly.
Now, when you joined the Sudbury Wolves in the broadcast booth, what was that first season like? There must have been some obstacles and some growing moments in that year.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, we had to do it all over a telephone line. We were our own technician. We had to learn. We had alligator clips. You had to take the telephone apart, alligator clip in, and then plug it into some sort of a device or whatever, an amplifier, and away you went. So not much different, I suppose, than what you guys have to do now, although you're probably doing it over the internet and everything else. But having said that, you worked by yourself. You didn't have a color guy usually. So you had to be prepared to fill in the 12-1 defeats and the 12-1 victories with some airtime that was going on. But it was a lot of fun, and we had competitive teams, so it made it a lot easier.
And of course, a lot of bus travel back in those days with the Sudbury
Yeah, and
Wolves.
you know what? They didn't even have a television on it. Nothing. You couldn't even watch movies. You had to entertain yourself with like books. Can you
What?
imagine people doing that now? Well, there was the odd copy of Playboy being passed around, but that's another story for another time.
But back in those days too, I would imagine the Sudbury Sault Ste. Marie rivalry, it's alive and well today. But back then, there were fewer teams, so you got to see some teams on a more regular basis. So those must have been some good games to call.
They were, and they were always very physical and nasty. Muzz McPherson was coaching at times up there. He always had a very physical, and I mean, the game was so much. Bert Templeton was coaching in Hamilton. They were wars. It was real physical hockey at that point. And so those, and you had to remember, after the Sioux, the Wolves road trip really didn't start till you got to the 401. And you made a left-hand turn or a right-hand turn, depending on where you were going. The roads were two-lane highway all the way up to Sudbury until you got to Barrie. when four lane was actually a part of it. So they were long bus rides, and weather conditions, I think, were probably a little more severe back then. Sometimes it was quite interesting. And we got stranded on the 401 a couple of times where we had to get out and help people push. We stayed in a gymnasium at Fanshawe College one night when the bus couldn't get anywhere, and we were able to get all kinds of stranded drivers and pile them into the bus. The bus could back up and get to close enough to the college so that everybody spent the night in a gym.
I didn't realize that being a broadcaster also meant, emergency clearing on the highway.
Oh, absolutely. I remember going to a car and a young lady was just in absolute tears and panic because she had virtually almost a newborn in the car with her, and we had to get her out and get the baby out and get it into the bus and whatnot where there was warmth and everything else. Yeah, it was some exciting times, but it was fun.
And of course, the Sudbury Arena, I still feel it has probably the better vantage point for broadcasting. You must have really enjoyed that being in the gondola there at the old Sudbury Barn.
Yeah, it really is. You're right. It hangs out over the seats. You're right above the ice. I don't think you could find a better vantage point to do games. It will be a sad day. It's come. The time has come. They're strongly involved in getting a new arena, which will be built adjacent to the old Elgin Street House of Thrills, as I used to call it. But it is a great old barn. It arrived on the scene the same year that I arrived on the scene. So its time has come, I'm sure.
And what's really cool too is recently you got to call a game again in Sudbury with your son David. Talk a bit about that experience, the father-son duo there.
Yeah, it was very special. David is the youngest of four boys. My other sons all played hockey and competitive hockey. My oldest son played a little bit in the provincial junior league with the Markham Waxers. David went the furthest. He got drafted by the Wolves, and unfortunately, COVID just completely screwed up his career. And really, it's a sad story, to be honest with you. But then he decided to get involved in doing some play-by-play, and lo and behold, he was able to. One day we were sitting here, and the phone rang, and the Wolves offered him an opportunity to call the game. And he looked at me like as if I'd done something. I said, David, the way the Wolves treated you as a player, I'm not very happy with them. So I did not phone anybody. This has got nothing to do with me. This is all you. And he's run with the ball and done very, very well. And so I was going up there to do an emceeing bit when George Armstrong, they were renaming the Garson Arena after the former Leaf captain. And so Wendell Clark and Rick Vive and Daryl Sittler and I were up there to commemorate that, along with the McCourt family and the Armstrong family. And the Wolves were playing that Friday. And David doesn't usually do the home games, but they made a special effort. And so I got to do color with them. And it was a real thrill. And it's something that I'll cherish for sure.
And did that experience bring back some memories about the fans back in the day?
Well, we weren't in the broadcast booth because it was busy with there's only 3 compartments. So we had to do it from the seats. And it was amazing how many people wanted to come up and say hi right in the middle of the broadcast. So we were dodging a little bit of a bullet there every once in a while. But I saw lots of friends and people I hadn't seen in a while. And I don't get back as often because I don't have family still living in Sudbury. But with David there, I was going back and forth when he was playing. And now I try to get to some of the road games when he comes down here. He's finishing up his collegiate career at university, taking sports administration at Laurentian. So Sudbury's always going to be have a soft spot in both of our hearts.
And of course, you're the Toronto Maple Leafs play-by-play voice. So how often do you get to catch David when he's doing the calls for the Sudbury Wolves?
Well, fortunately, with the intranet, I can listen anytime. So even if we have a game on the same night during the intermissions, I'll tune into it and listen to them. And then when I'm home, I do it. And if I can get to a game when we don't have a game that's in and around the area, Oshawa, Barrie, Brantford or wherever, I'll try and get to it and just. What I like to do is sit in the stands and listen
Mm,
because the audio from the radio is about what, maybe 30 seconds behind.
hmm.
So I'll watch a play that happens. And I wonder how he's going to handle this, and then listen to him do it. So it's kind of neat.
And does he ask you for any sort of tips at all, or how does that relationship work?
We the same way we did, because I'm a goalie as well, and my dad was a goalie, and so when we would get into the car, my dad would sit there and be very quiet, depending on whatever, and we didn't have our father son goalie chat until I asked, "What did you think of that second one that went in from the other end of the building?" And then we would have our goalie chat. Well, I did that with David as well. And I let him kind of decide, if I was listening, what did you think? What could I do here or whatever? And then I'll give him, what my thoughts. But I always tell him, this is your career. This is your style. You have to develop your own style. And if you think what I'm suggesting is bogus, well, then it's bogus. Do it the way you want to do it. But we have good conversations about it, and I think he takes in what I would suggest, and then kind of regurgitates it a little bit, and then decides whether he wants to implement that or not.
Oh, that's awesome. And for you doing the Toronto Maple Leafs, everyone, has heard the Holy Mackinac call. They hear the passion in your voice. What is it that continues to drive you today to continue to call hockey games?
Well, you know what? Through COVID and the lockout year a couple of years ago, I found out what retirement was like, and I really don't like it.
Oh, okay.
I enjoy going to the rink. I enjoy the atmosphere. I enjoy the rush, of doing the games. I mean, you're not in the game, but you're as close as damn is to swearing
Mhm.
in the game. And so I enjoy working with Jim Ralph, who I've done for 27 years. And I think that that's part and parcel of why I still enjoy doing it. When I don't know when I can't do it, and I don't want to be in a position where I'm just kind of hanging around because I was there. So at this point, I've got another year on our contract after this one, and then we'll wait and see how it plays out after that. But at this point, I still enjoy doing the games, so why not continue doing them? And if they think that I'm at least doing a decent job, then maybe they'll let me do it again.
And just looking back, what's been your biggest takeaway doing the play-by-play for the Maple Leafs? Is there something that really stands out for you?
I mean, everybody has their favorite calls and favorite moments. The Nicky Borishevsky goal way back in '92 and '93, that season was magical, mainly because we had finally rid ourselves of the Harold Ballard era of where the team was not prepared to spend money to try and become a good hockey team. That was not the issue at that point. New ownership had arrived. They were trying to be as proactive as they could. And that sort of was the bailiwick that things have changed. And of course, they went on to have that great run. And except for a horrible call in Los Angeles, maybe they would have got to the Stanley Cup final, and who knows what might have happened. The following year, the same thing. They got out to the semifinals again and lost in Vancouver. So all of those, the Pat Quinn years, the games against Ottawa, the playoff games against Ottawa were always special. Austin Matthews' first game, 4 goals, and then being able to go back to the hotel afterwards and meet his parents for the first time, and have, because of the internet, have them send down the calls so that we could sit with a glass of champagne saluting the 4 goals and having his parents hear my calls of the goals were pretty special.
Well, I know for me growing up, hearing you calling Matt Sundin's milestone goals was always something that stood out to me. And, it's great, Joe, to be able to chat with you and to even look back during your time with the Sudbury Wolves.
Well, my pleasure, Mike, and good luck with all of the boys and your career, and also with how things are going with Barrie. Pretty good teams in that league, I'll tell you. It's tough to get out of, and it's a competitive group, and you've got to have a lot of good players.
Well, if you're in Barrie, I'll try and keep an eye out for you.
All right, for sure.
So that was former Sudbury Wolves and current Toronto Maple Leafs play-by-play voice Joe Bowen. It's actually pretty cool just to see that the OHL is more than just a development league for players and coaches, also broadcasters like Joe Bowen, who got his start with the Sudbury Wolves and then called games out in Halifax before arriving in Toronto. So it's great to see just the experience of Bowen during his time with the Wolves in the 70s and now getting a chance to call a game with his son, David Bowen, at a recent matchup back at the Sudbury Community Arena. So some really cool stuff there. And if you like these kind of interviews, well, don't forget to hit like and subscribe as we'll be interviewing more broadcasters from around the Ontario Hockey League and potentially more former broadcasters. So again, thank you very much for all your support. Talk to you again soon.